So our first question is, could you explain a little bit about how you discovered you were a vampire?
Of course, absolutely. I would be more than happy to. When I was a kid, when I was about 7 years old, was when I had my, what we call it in the vampire community, our awakening experience. I don't really go into the full, like, tick for tick breakdown, because in the vampire community we do have our laws. We actually
Right.
do. We have a code of ethics, etc. And within the vampire community, there's something called a sympathetic vampire. And a sympathetic vampire is somebody that, when you are explaining all of these things, when you're going into gratuitous detail, can hear these things and actually have a similar effect, but it isn't actually real. It isn't a real experience, and it is temporary. So it can be very confusing and very jarring for somebody. But what I can say is that when I was 7 years old, I had this moment where the world kind of went from this to this, and I just always knew, like, it was an instant not knowing what it was that I wasn't, that I didn't feel human, that I did not feel normal, and that a lot of the instincts and kind of energies that were surrounding me were not, the usual situation. And yeah, that's really how I discovered it. I was very into vampires, obviously. So there is a possibility that the imagery, vampiric imagery, the idea of it kind of jogged my memory and kind of brought me out of it, like so many of us experience as well.
Okay.
That's interesting to know because, like, when we think of vampires, we obviously think of what's portrayed in popular culture, film and television, and that kind of thing. So it's very interesting that it was completely different from what you hear about, and what people outside of the vampire community hear about.
Yes, absolutely. It is very different. There's always that kind of that immediate thought to the Hollywood vampire, to vampire novels and fiction, this idea of like the eternal kiss and this, dark embrace. But the truth is definitely much different than the fiction, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so I know that in some cases, some other vampires believe that people are turned from humans into vampires, and obviously you believe that you're born a vampire. I was wondering if you could explain some of like the difference between the different types of communities.
Absolutely, 100%. I would love to. So there are many different types of vampires. You have your psychic vampires, which a lot of them feel that they are born with an energetic wound to their subtle body, right? You have, your normal human, right? And they have their normal energy. So the idea is, if the body can get sick, why can't the spirit, why can't the soul get sick? So with these psychic vampires, a lot of them feel that because of this wound, they need to kind of supplement with external energies in order to feel well, in order to be whole. Then you have, I can't go into too much detail with some of the other ones, because I honestly don't know it to the depth to explain them. But then you have the Ascetians, which is an otherkin experience that is based off of ancient Egyptian practices. Yes, ancient Egyptian vampires is very, very interesting. You have the occult vampires, which is more kind of based off of vampire magic or predatory spirituality, which you would call like draconian vampire magic. And then there's just your base vampire magic that most practitioners could learn to use as well.
Okay. That's super interesting, just that there's so many different types.
Until, delving into the research a little bit on vampires, because I didn't even know that there were so many communities. It's interesting to learn all of the different types.
Yeah, I didn't know either. I had seen a couple of things on like the Travel Channel, and obviously that's not the best source of information.
Of course, of course. What's even more fascinating is that within these subsects, within these different types of vampires, there are also houses and guilds and covens, and that all follow their own kind of view of what their specific type kind of lean towards. It's there's a lot of different vampires out there. It's pretty interesting.
Absolutely, most definitely is interesting. So, speaking of and going back to the popular culture a little bit, do you enjoy consuming media that portrays vampires? And do you also have a favorite fictional vampire?
Absolutely. There are a lot of, see, this is great. There are a lot of real life living vampires who actually do get offended by the pop culture vampire, the vampire novel, the romantic view. But me on my end, I love vampire fiction. I absolutely love it. I think it does nothing but paint vampires in a very romantic kind of sense. And you know, I actually think it's a good thing. Can it make it a little confusing for other people? Absolutely, especially when you start saying, well, that's all fiction, but there is a real life version of that. People are like, well, do you turn into a bat? Are you garlic? Sunlight. Holy water, though. And so that's where it can get a little messy. And my favorite vampire, hands down, I have to go with the more known one, because the one I want to name is not very known, would be Alucard from the anime Hellsing, if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard of that, but I haven't watched any of it.
I mean, there's so many different variations of that one as well. So I've heard of it, but I haven't seen that one either. My favorite fictional vampire is Bill Compton.
Bill? I'm like, okay, why not Eric?
Oh my gosh. So I really like Eric too, but I don't know. I think it's the whole like Southern thing. Like he really, I don't think that you or most people would assume that he's a vampire. I don't know.
Okay.
And I really like the love story between him and Sookie Sackhow, so
That's fair. You know, I do an impression of Bill.
Oh, let me hear it.
Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
Sookie is mine.
Yes. I love it so much.
You just made her day. You have no idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had to. The moment you said Bill, I was like, oh, I have to.
I personally am more of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer Spike girl, but...
Oh, Spike all the way. Spike is amazing. I love Spike.
Yeah, he's awesome. Not so much of a wuss as Angel.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
So I know that you're a best-selling author and your books are available on Amazon. Can you tell us about your work?
Absolutely, yes. I have two best-selling poetry anthologies out right now. They are Blood and Roses and Death and Lilies. They are poetry books about the macabre side of life. They are about trauma, about real life, really relatable trauma. They are about dark passion, romance, and there are some other ones in there that are just for wholesome sakes as well, and horror. There are some horror ones in there too.
Sounds right up our alley.
I feel like I'm gonna go buy it right now, to be honest.
That would be amazing. And then I'm also working on right now. It is just done, and ready for pre-order within the next month. My first novel that I have ever written. Yes, and I'm very excited.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I've always been interested in writing a novel, but I know I don't have like the patience or the commitment to do it.
I've been interested in writing my whole life. I mentioned to Ro in one of our other podcast shows that I want to possibly do like a short story book that's based off of my nightmares. So
that's very interesting.
Why am I laughing?
That's very cool.
Thank you. We had a whole episode on nightmares, and the like science behind nightmares is really interesting. So,
oh, fast! I have to check it out then, definitely.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So this one I think you kind of already went over, but through our research we found that there are several types of vampires. Could you explain those to our audience and tell us which one you align with?
Yes, the one that I align with is the Assassin, the basis off of ancient Egyptian vampiric culture. It is the worship of the goddess Aset, and it is the belief that our souls are not entirely human, that our soul is the vampiric entity. It gets very, very interesting because unlike most psychic vampires, right, it is, instead of this idea of having a wound, to having a wound to the energetic body, it is the idea that our souls give off too much energy, so we are forced that our bodies can't contain it. So we're constantly burning off this energy, and to make up for the difference, we have to take energy from an external source.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That actually sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know why I said reasonable like that.
Oh, it's okay. You're fine.
What do you think the most important thing is that our audience should understand about real life vampires in their communities?
Oh, simple, very simple. The understanding that we are just here. We are practitioners. We are your peers, your neighbors. We are more like you than you probably realize. In fact, most real life living vampires, you probably pass one or two every once in a while, more often than you probably realize. And you probably wouldn't know it unless you were very energetically sensitive. We just want to exist.
That makes
Absolutely.
a ton of sense. And I feel like we kept saying when we were doing our research on vampires in the vampire community that it's really just a culture that we didn't know about. And it's just like learning about a different culture. And we kind of feel like we became sociologists learning about.
And we were just talking in one of our last episodes about psychic abilities and whether or not we believe in that. And I do very much, and I feel and have been told by my mom, because she also believes in possessing, how would you say, that ability?
Yeah.
So I believe that I do have psychic abilities, as well as they were passed down to me from my mom.
Well, that is so interesting.
So I find it really interesting that you've mentioned that a few times already in this interview. So I'm like, wow, that is really cool.
That is interesting, especially because you were asking whether or not there are people out there who might be vampires who don't know they are.
That is a very good question. So I had mentioned the awakening process. I had mentioned that I awakened when I was 7 years old. That is, within the community, a rarity. And while it sounds like it would make you like a special snowflake, or we get special bird, it's actually a really hard. It's a much harder time. It's a much harder experience because it's very confusing. Most vampires, though, don't actually know that they're vampires yet, because the most common type of vampire is what we call a latent awakener. And that is somebody that awakens later in life. These people can awaken between the ages of late teens to some vampires have awakened when they were 50, 60 years old.
Oh, wow. I was gonna ask that question too. So you already answered that question for me, because I was wondering how old can someone be for that process to happen.
Right. So. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, which one are we at?
That's a good question. Sorry. This one.
Okay. Oh yeah, I was very excited about this question. So, do other vampires get upset with you for being so vocal and open about this sort of hidden facet of society?
I love this question. See, it's interesting because the idea that it's almost like I'm Lestat. I'm stepping out of the shadows and I'm going, come out wherever you are. But the truth of the matter is, we've been here. We've been here for a while, and a lot of us have just kind of gone silent because of the fear of persecution. Me stepping forward and kind of into the light to go, no, we're here. We are absolutely still here. We are still thriving and doing our best to take care of our communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have only gotten positivity. I've had a lot of people reach out to me. I've had a lot of vampires reach out to me and be like, thank you so much for giving us a voice again. And I've had those that have been through their process of awakening and were confused go, I understand what this is. I understand what I'm going through. You've really helped me. So far, it's been nothing but positivity. Once in a while, I'll get the random person that's just kind of like, you're exposing us all. What are you doing? And I'll just kind of be like, dude, I'm like, there are plenty of other real life vampires that have been there before me. I'm just the newest one.
Right.
That is really cool, and I'm glad to hear that because both of us were wondering if there was going to be more of the ones that were feeling like you were exposing everything. So that is really nice to hear that it's mostly positive.
Yeah.
It's been a good time.
That's great. And so kind of along those lines, do you think there's a stigma around considering yourself a vampire, and how has that affected you personally?
Oh, absolutely there is a stigma. Are you kidding? It is one of the reasons that so many real life living vampires don't come out of the shadows, that don't come to the light to go, hey, I'm here, is because of the immediate persecution, the immediate invalidation of their experiences. It is, I guess that also comes back to the question of, do you get offended by the Hollywood vampires, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the Hollywood vampires and because of that kind of pop culture, more people are quicker to put that down because the immediate thought that they have is, oh, a cape, you turn into a bat, you're immortal, you're undead, all these things. So they're not looking to the spiritual practice and the spiritual experience. They're looking to the superstition and the fiction.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because even doing research for this, it was like a lot of people were talking about like the psychological aspect of the vampire community and that kind of thing. And there wasn't a lot of information out there on like how people who are actually in the communities are actually feel, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we really wanted to do this interview, because we wanted to make sure that we were giving somebody in the community a voice and not just talking about stuff we don't understand.
Absolutely.
Well, it's super appreciated. It's so appreciated, honestly. And I think that a lot of us, we do face persecution. We do kind of, when I do my live streams, I get a lot of people that are very confused about what this is coming in, like, oh my gosh, fake, all of that stuff. But I'm of the mind that when that stuff happens, and with, the naysayers, doubters, et cetera, my first thought is, well, of course they do. They've seen movies. That's the only exposure that they've had. They don't understand that there's an actual community, which is why I really my main goal when I'm doing my lives or I'm talking about the subject of being a real life vampire is to educate. And I think it is extremely important. So thank you.
You're welcome. So that also brings me into our next question, and you've maybe kind of already answered it, but are you ever concerned about your safety as a vampire? Like out in society?
There are moments when I think about it, when I kind of like, mull it over. I do have generalized anxiety, though. I actually do. So that
we
is
both
part
experience
of the
anxiety as well. Yeah.
I'll have my moments where I'm like, oh God, is this gonna, is somebody gonna, but the what I've gotten is so much positivity, that it's not really something that genuinely concerns me. So not really, I'm not like genuinely worried or concerned. I mean, at the end of the day, we do live in a human society with human laws, and if there was like a vampire hunter society or these kinds of things, there are legal ramifications. At the end of the day, we are people and protected by the law.
Absolutely.
That really covers what we were concerned about, because when we were talking about it, we were like, well, is there vampire hunters? Because that's what you see. I mean, you see Van Helsing and Buffy and...
Van Helsing! No, the vampire hunters, for the most part, are superstition, or they were considered vampire hunters back in the day, depending on what cultural background they had, of course, because vampires also come from a lot of superstition. Someone will have like some strange situations with like a corpse, or or a grave is disturbed and people go missing, and there will be one guy that's just like, well, I'm a vampire hunter, I can take care of this, and but it's mostly fiction.
Okay.
That's good to hear.
That is good to hear. And so when we were doing our research, I had read that some real-life vampires do actually feed on blood, and I know that not everyone does, but the ones that do seem to have employed medical professionals to assist them with curating a safe product from their willing donors, and it's nothing like is portrayed in film and television where you see unwilling victims. But could you explain to our audience some of the rules that vampires have to abide by?
Absolutely, yes. The rules that vampires have to abide by are very simple. I mean, think about human society. They're very similar. But the main ones that are very specifically vampiric are: you cannot feed without consent. Consent is a gigantic part of the vampire community. We very much, when you have a donor, it is a very sacred thing. So the idea of taking energy, taking from, whether it be sang, sai, tantra, anything in between, it is always met with consent and the donor's comfort and safety. And that is what is most important always. Yes.
Okay, good.
That's good to know, because I feel like that's like the biggest thing that people think of when they think of vampires is like, feeding on blood and attacking and things. And I feel like that's like the biggest hurdle to overcome when you're like telling people about real life vampires is like, no,
and then
that's
there's
not.
been celebrities out there who have sort of, I don't know, joked about being vampires. Like there was the whole Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton thing, and then now modern day Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie is Megan Fox and MGK. So I don't know.
Yes.
It's just
right.
I feel like they can confuse people sometimes.
That's it's. Do I know if they're vampires? I don't know if they're vampires. I actually don't know. That's for them. I've never met them in person. I've never paid much attention to it or seen if there was any energetic pull or anything like that. But I can understand why it would be very confusing, especially with the way that it's portrayed, the idea of sinking your fangs into someone's neck, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, such a practice, such an idea of using your fangs to do anything like that, or biting just in general, is unsafe for the person you would do that to, which is why when it comes to anything that would be saying, etc., there would be a medical professional or anything like that, and nothing to the amount that would be assumed. But that is the other thing is that saying, which is blood feeders, etc., etc. A lot of them tend to make the change to learning how to get their energy from a psychic source, getting it more in a pranic sense, using various energetic techniques that are akin to Reiki, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. because we live in a modern age, and the modern age has bloodborne diseases, bloodborne illnesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and just safety practices, nothing is, perfect. So it's much easier at the end of the day to just go, well, this can get me what I need more consistently and more safely.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense, and that's like good that people are considering their safety when they're doing these things. And
absolutely. And not at all what a great deal of what people think. So I think it's good. I like you've already mentioned that a lot of what you are doing is to educate people. So I feel like this is, going to be bringing a lot of things to light that a lot of people didn't know.
I agree. And is there anything else that you think is important that our audience know about either you or the vampire community, or if you just want to take this time to promote yourself, that's also cool.
Of course. Other things to note about the vampire community. We're just here. We're here. You probably cross a vampire that you probably have not known it was a vampire. Don't freak out. It's not what you think. You're not going to be whisked away into the night. And you probably have never been fed off of or anything like that, because consent is extremely, extremely important. But we just want to exist. We want to be able to practice what we practice, be able to talk about our spirituality when we feel comfortable enough, and to live without persecution as much as we're able to. But with that said, hi, I'm the Vampire Jack Townson. You can find me on TikTok, you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and anywhere that social media exists. You can find my books on Amazon, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and Barnes & Noble. And,
Well, I would like you to know that I personally, and I think I speak for Ro as well when I say this, that we are happy to exist with you and other vampires.
Yeah, it's been a learning experience, and for sure. And now that I know that the community is there, I'm happy that they're there. I'm not like worried about it. Or
yeah, I've always had like a very we've both been very interested in vampires throughout our life. So we were very excited to be doing this episode, and we're very happy and excited that you agreed to do this interview with us. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And just to